The charity gala was one of those events that looked perfect from the outside golden lights. Quiet music, people dressed in clothes that cost more than a waitress would make in months. But behind all that beauty, there was a kind of coldness in the air, a feeling that everyone there was trying to prove something. The only people who weren't pretending were the staff, who worked quietly in the background, hoping to get through the night without any trouble. Among them was a young waitress named Elena. She moved from table to table with a small, polite smile, careful not to draw too much attention to herself. She had learned long ago that in places like this, people didn't want to see the ones serving them. They wanted the service, not the faces. So Elena kept her head down and focused on her work. But even with all her effort to blend into the background, she couldn't escape the eyes of the man everyone seemed to orbit around, a billionaire who funded the event. A man known for his confidence, his power, and unfortunately, his habit of mocking people he considered beneath him. His name was Victor. When he walked into a room, people moved without being asked. When he spoke, they laughed even if the joke wasn't funny. When he made a comment about someone, everyone pretended to agree. That was simply how things always went around him. Victor stood near the bar, holding a glass of something expensive, watching the room like it belonged to him. In many ways, it did. He funded the event. He hosted most of the guests. His name was printed in gold on the invitations. And tonight, he seemed to be in one of those moods where he wanted entertainment, but not the kind on the stage. The grand piano sat at the center of the hall, polished so well it reflected the lights like water. A hired musician had been playing quietly for most of the evening, filling the space with gentle background music. But after a break, the piano sat empty, waiting for the next performer, when Victor noticed Elena passing by with a tray of glasses. Something about her caught his attention, not in a kind way, but in the way someone might notice something unusual and want to poke at it. He tapped the edge of her tray lightly with one finger. "You," he said, loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "Do you know how to play the piano?" The question hit Elena like a sudden gust of cold air. She froze for a moment, unsure how to respond. She wasn't used to anyone speaking to her loudly in front of a crowd, let alone a man like Victor. I'm just serving drinks," she replied softly. Victor smiled, the kind of smile that made people uncomfortable, because it wasn't warm, it was sharp. "Yes, I can see that. But I'm asking if you know how to play." A few guests turned to look curious. Some even smirked, sensing where this was going. A waitress at a golden gala being asked to play a grand piano? To them, it sounded like a joke waiting to happen. Elena's heart started beating fast. She did know how to play a piano. She had grown up with one. But that was a long time ago, in a different life, one that had ended the day her mother passed away. She didn't talk about it. She didn't play anymore. She worked, saved money, and kept her memories buried where no one could poke at them. But how could she explain that? She simply shook her head. "I haven't played in a long time." Victor raised an eyebrow. "So you do know how?" She didn't answer. She didn't want to lie, and she didn't want to admit anything either. But Victor wasn't the kind of man who let things go once he got curious. He stepped closer, lowering his voice slightly, but keeping it loud enough that the surrounding guests could hear. "Why don't you give us a little performance? It would be interesting. And I'm sure the guests would love a bit of unexpected entertainment." His tone made the situation clear. This wasn't a polite invitation. This was pressure wrapped in a smile. Elena held her tray tightly, feeling her palms grow warm with nerves. She didn't want to do this. She didn't want all those eyes on her. But she also knew how easily a powerful man could get her removed from the event if she upset him. She needed this job, and opportunities like this were hard to come by. Before she could answer, One of the guests, a woman in a sparkling dress, laughed quietly and said, "Oh, come on, it'll be fun. Let her try." Another man added, "Yes, why not? It's only a song." Only a song. To them, it was nothing, a joke, a little surprise moment to talk about. To Elena, it felt like someone was pushing open a door she had locked years ago. Victor nodded toward the piano. "Go ahead. Play something. Anything. Let's see what you can do." Elena looked around. The whole room seemed to be waiting. Some people whispered. Others watched with amusement. No one expected her to actually play well. If anything, they expected her to sit there awkwardly, hit a few wrong notes, and become the evening's little moment of humor. Her throat tightened. She didn't want to be humiliated. She didn't want to relive memories she wasn't ready to face. But she felt trapped. Walking away would look disrespectful. Refusing might get her in trouble with her manager, or worse, fired. A small voice inside her whispered, something she hadn't felt in years. "You can do this." It wasn't confidence. It wasn't bravery. It was more like a piece of her old self trying to breathe again. She set the tray down on a nearby table, wiped her palms discreetly on her apron, and took a slow breath. The room watched her walk toward the piano. The soft click of her shoes on the floor seemed louder than the music had been earlier. Every step felt heavy, but she kept moving. When she reached the grand piano, she paused. The polished keys reflected her shaky fingers. She could feel dozens of eyes on her back. She didn't look at anyone. She didn't want to see the doubt or the hidden amusement on their faces. She slowly pulled out the bench and sat down. It was the first time she had sat at a piano in years. The familiar scent of wood and polish brought back memories she had tried not to think about. Her mother's voice, her small hands learning their first melodies, afternoons spent practicing until her fingers hurt. All of it flooded her mind at once. She swallowed hard and placed her hands gently on the keys. They felt cold, almost foreign. Behind her, she heard someone whisper, "This is going to be interesting." Victor chuckled and crossed his arms, waiting. Elena closed her eyes for a moment. She didn't think about the crowd. She didn't think about the fear. She thought about the one thing that had always mattered, the music she used to love. She took a slow breath. Her fingers pressed the first key. Elena's fingers hovered above the piano keys, and for a few long seconds she didn't move at all. It felt as if the entire room had paused with her, waiting to see what she would do. She could hear her own breathing, slow and uneven, and the soft rustle of someone shifting in their chair behind her. Everything else felt distant. She didn't want to be here. She didn't want all those eyes on her, expecting her to make a fool of herself. She didn't want to remember the past she had spent years trying to bury. But somehow, sitting there at the piano, those memories pushed themselves into her mind anyway, as if they had been waiting for this moment. She remembered the small apartment where she grew up, the worn-out carpet, the tiny kitchen, and in the corner of the living room, a dusty upright piano her mother had worked extra shifts to afford. It wasn't fancy, but to Elena, it had been the most magical thing in the world. She spent hours pressing the keys, fascinated by how one touch could fill the room with sound. Her mother used to sit beside her, sometimes humming along, sometimes tapping a simple rhythm on the wood. She always smelled faintly like coffee and lavender lotion, and she always encouraged Elena to keep going. "One day you will play on a stage," she used to say, "and people will listen because your heart is in your music." Elena had believed her. She practiced after school, before dinner, sometimes even late at night when she couldn't sleep. Her fingers weren't strong at first, but they grew steadier over the years. Music became her safe place, the one thing she felt truly good at. Then everything changed. Her mother got sick, and the apartment grew quiet. The piano stayed untouched for weeks at a time. By the time Elena understood how serious the illness was, it was already too late. After losing her mother, she stopped playing altogether. The sound of the piano only reminded her of what she had lost. She didn't tell anyone about her past. She didn't let herself think about it. Life became about working, surviving, and moving forward one day at a time. But now, in a room full of wealthy strangers who expected nothing from her besides amusement, she found herself fighting against the memories and the ache they brought. Her hand trembled slightly as she touched the keys. Behind her, Victor leaned back in his chair and whispered something to a guest, probably another joke at her expense. The sound of their quiet laughter pricked at her nerves. She had two choices: walk away and let them believe she was nothing, or play something and remind herself who she used to be. She exhaled slowly and pressed a soft note. It was barely a sound, just a gentle, hesitant beginning, but it felt like lighting a match in a dark room. The note lingered, and with it came a wave of emotion, so strong she nearly pulled her hand back. But she didn't single quotes T. Instead, she played another note, then another. The first few notes were shaky, unsure, like a voice that hadn't spoken in years. Yet the melody began to take shape, faint at first, but familiar. It was the same tune her mother had taught her when she was barely tall enough to reach the keys. A simple melody, one her mother used to hum while cooking or folding laundry. A song that had always made their little home feel warm. Elena didn't realize she was holding her breath until she let it out slowly, letting the notes guide her hands. As the melody unfolded, the room behind her grew quieter. Chatter faded. Laughter died down. The guests leaned slightly forward, unsure of what they were hearing, but unable to look away. Even Victor's smug expression shifted a little. He sat up straighter, eyebrows raised, watching with mild surprise. It quickly turned into something else: confusion, maybe even curiosity. Elena continued playing, letting her fingers move more freely. The melody softened at some points, then grew slightly stronger, as if telling a story without words. And in a way, it was telling her story. Her mother's story. The story of a girl who had loved music before life became too heavy. For the first time in years, she felt connected to something she had lost. The piano keys didn't feel strange anymore. They felt like home. She had forgotten how music could make time pause. She had forgotten how it could make her chest tighten with emotion. But most of all, she had forgotten how it felt to express something she never had the courage to say out loud. As she played, soft memories flickered through her mind. Her mother smiling as she placed a blanket around her shoulders. The two of them laughing when Elena missed a note and accidentally played something that sounded like a cartoon soundtrack. The way her mother clapped proudly after every little tune, even the ones that weren't very good. Elena felt her eyes sting, but she didn't stop. She played through the ache, through the fear, through the heaviness in her chest. And the music grew clearer, steadier, fuller. The melody rose gently like a whisper, turning into a soft voice. Someone behind her gasped quietly. Another person murmured, "She can actually play." Someone else said, "I didn't expect that." Elena didn't look at them. She didn't need to. She could feel the room changing, the tension shifting from amusement to curiosity, from curiosity to amazement. The longer she played, the more she felt something inside her loosen a knot she hadn't realized was tied so tightly. She wasn't just playing notes. She was letting out the feelings she had kept trapped for years. At one point, the melody softened until it felt almost like a whisper. The guests leaned in even closer. Not a single glass clinked. Not a single foot tapped. A server who had been carrying a tray paused, mid-step. Even the air seemed to stand still. But as the emotion swelled in her chest, the melody slowly changed. It deepened and warmed. shifting into something a little stronger, a little braver. Her hands moved with more confidence, gliding across the keys with a grace she had forgotten. She possessed Dot. It wasn't a professional performance. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. It came from a place that no amount of money or training could imitate. Behind her, a man whispered, "She's incredible." Elena didn't hear the words, but she felt the energy in the room change. It was no longer a crowd watching a waitress. It was a room full of people, witnessing something they didn't expect. She reached the part of the melody that her mother had always said was the heart of the song. A soft climb followed by a gentle fall, like breathing. Elena played it the way she remembered her mother teaching her, letting the notes float softly before grounding themselves again. Dot by now, the room had completely transformed. Even Victor, who had started this whole thing as a joke, stared at her with his mouth slightly open. The arrogance had slipped from his face, replaced by something else, maybe shock, maybe disbelief. Elena didn't see any of it. She was too lost in the music. Dot, as she approached the final notes, her hands slowed. The melody softened again, becoming delicate, almost fragile. She let each note linger, giving it space to breathe. The last few moments felt like releasing a deep breath she had been holding for years. Finally, she pressed the final note. Dot, it rang gently through the hall, soft and warm, settling into the quiet space around her. And then, silence, not a heavy silence, not an awkward one, but the kind of silence that comes when people are too moved to speak. Elena slowly lowered her hands from the keys. She stared down at them, unsure if they were still trembling or if the sensation came from her racing heartbeat. She could feel dozens of eyes on her, but she didn't turn around yet. She needed a moment to breathe, to steady herself after giving so much of her heart to the music. She had no idea what the room thought of her. She had no idea if they saw her differently now, or still viewed her as just a waitress. But for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel small. Dot. She felt seen. Dot. And in that fragile, quiet moment, Elena realized something she hadn't expected, that she had missed this. She had missed music. She had missed the feeling of being alive in a way nothing else could give her. What she didn't know, as she sat there gathering her breath, was that her life had just changed without a single word being spoken. Elena sat there frozen for a moment, her hands resting in her lap, trying to calm her breathing. The last soft note still echoed in her chest, even if it had already faded from the air. She didn't dare turn around. She didn't know what she was supposed to do next. She wasn't used to any of this, being watched, being listened to, being the center of attention. She was only a waitress, someone whose job was to walk quietly between tables and disappear into the background. She thought maybe she should stand up and leave the piano. Maybe she should return to her tray and pretend like nothing had happened. Maybe she should apologize for taking too long. Her mind raced through all the possibilities, none of them making complete sense. But before she could decide what to do, a single sound broke through the silence. Hands coming together. One clap. Dot, then another dot, then several dot, and suddenly the entire hall erupted in applause. She didn't turn around right away. The shock hit her so unexpectedly that she felt almost dizzy. The guests weren't laughing the way she feared they would. They weren't whispering jokes to each other. They were actually clapping, loudly. Some even stood up from their chairs, clapping with a kind of energy usually reserved for big performances. A warm rush of emotion filled her chest, so unfamiliar that it scared her a little. She finally lifted her head and slowly turned. Around, what she saw didn't feel real. People inelegant, clothing people she had just served drinks to, were looking directly at her with expressions she never imagined she would see on there. Faces, respect, astonishment, even admiration. A woman near the front dabbed her eyes with a napkin. A young man near the back nodded at her with genuine appreciation. It was overwhelming. And then there was Victor. He hadn't stood. But for the first time all evening, he didn't look bored or smug. His expression was somewhere between shock and confusion, as if he couldn't understand how the quiet waitress he expected to embarrass had just taken control of the entire room with nothing but a melody. Elena didn't know how to react. She stood up slowly, her legs feeling a little weak. She held onto the edge of the piano for support, not because she felt like she might fall, but because she didn't know where else to put her hands. A few people stepped closer to the piano, offering compliments. That was beautiful. You play like someone who has trained for years. I haven't heard a melody like that in a long time. She nodded politely, barely able to get any words out. Her mind was still trying to catch up with what was happening. She wasn't used to praise, certainly not from strangers dressed in diamonds and silk. She took a small step back, wanting to slip away before anyone asked too many questions. She didn't want to be the center of the room. She didn't want people digging into her personal life. She just wanted to return to the quiet corner where she had left her tray. But before she could leave, someone gently touched her shoulder. She turned to see an older woman dressed in an elegant gown. Her eyes were kind, her smile soft. "You have a gift," the woman said. "Don't hide it." Elena swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. She tried to smile, but it came out faint and unsteady. "I just played something I remembered," she said quietly. The woman shook her head gently. "No, you played something from the heart. There's a difference." Before Elena could say anything else, she heard footsteps approaching. She looked up and saw the event manager walking toward her with an expression she couldn't quite read. For a moment, she panicked, thinking she was about to be scolded for stepping out of her role. But he simply smiled, though it looked like he was trying not to show how surprised he was. "That was unexpected," he said, "but very well done." "Thank you," she managed to whisper. "You should get back to your tasks now," he added gently, aware that too many eyes were still on her. She nodded quickly, relieved to have something familiar to return to. She stepped away from the piano, weaving carefully through the guests as they continued to talk about her performance. A few tried to stop her and say more, but she smiled apologetically and hurried past them. When she reached her tray, she let out a breath she didn't know she had been holding. She leaned slightly on a nearby table and closed her eyes for a second. The sound of applause still echoed faintly in her ears. It didn't feel real. She tried to focus on her work again, but her hands shook slightly every time she picked up a glass. She wasn't used to being noticed. She wasn't used to feeling something warm and hopeful stirring deep inside her. She tried to calm down. She told herself to breathe. She reminded herself that this moment didn't change anything. She was still a waitress. She still had a shift to finish. She still needed her job, but a small part of her one she hadn't felt in years whispered something different. Maybe things could change? She didn't let the thought grow. She didn't want to hope for something impossible, but she couldn't ignore it completely either. As she continued serving guests, she caught people glancing at her with curiosity. They whispered to each other when she passed. Not in a rude way, but in a way that said they had discovered something surprising about her. For the first time, the background didn't feel like a hiding place. It felt like a place she had outgrown without realizing it. While she tried to focus, she couldn't shake off the feeling that someone was watching her. She turned slightly and noticed Victor standing near the bar, his gaze still fixed on her. His expression was unreadable, not angry, not impressed, but something in between. She quickly looked away, pretending she didn't see him. She didn't want any trouble, especially not from the person who had forced her into playing in the first place. But Victor didn't look away. He seemed deep in thought. as if replaying the entire moment in his mind. After a few minutes, he started walking toward her. Elena felt her heart jump. She braced herself, unsure what he was going to say. Would he mock her? Would he pretend he had planned everything? Would he make another comment that made her regret playing? He stopped a few steps from her. His tone was different, now lower, quieter. You didn't say you could play like that. Elena kept her eyes on the tray she was arranging. You didn't ask. A few guests standing nearby overheard and exchanged amused glances. But it wasn't a rude reply. It was honest, simple, and for a moment, Victor seemed taken aback. He opened his mouth as if to say something, then paused. He didn't seem sure how to continue the conversation. Finally, he said, "Where did you learn?" Elena hesitated, feeling a familiar tightness in her chest. At home, when I was young. That was all she said. She didn't want to share more. She didn't want to reopen wounds she had barely begun to face again. Victor nodded slowly, as if studying her. Well, you surprised everyone tonight. She wasn't sure if that was meant as praise or just a statement. I didn't mean to, she said softly. I only wanted to get through the moment. He seemed confused by her honesty. Most people tried to impress him. Most people tried to gain something from him. Elena didn't want anything from him at all. Before he could say more, a group of guests approached him, pulling his attention away. He gave her one last look before turning to greet them. As soon as he walked away, Elena let out a long breath. Her pulse finally began to slow. The night continued, but the feeling in the room had shifted. The guests talked about her performance throughout the evening, and some even asked the event manager questions about her. Elena kept her distance and simply did her job, trying to blend back into the quiet spaces. But she couldn't ignore the way people now looked at her as someone more than a background worker. By the time the event neared its end, Elena's feet ached and her shoulders were sore, but her heart felt strangely light. The warmth she felt after playing hadn't faded. As she gathered empty glasses from a corner table, one of the guests approached her. He was a middle-aged man with gentle eyes and a calm voice. Excuse me, he said softly. I hope you don't mind me asking, but have you ever considered playing again? Professionally, I mean. Elena blinked in surprise. No, I haven't. I stopped a long time ago. He nodded thoughtfully. Well, if you ever decide to start again, you should know something. She looked at him, waiting. That kind of emotion can't be taught, he said. People spend years trying to achieve it. And you already have it. She didn't know how to respond. She simply nodded, feeling a lump form in her throat. As he walked away, Elena felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Possibility. She didn't know what would come next. She didn't know what doors might open, or if any of this would matter tomorrow. But deep inside her, a quiet hope began to grow, a hope she thought she had lost forever. And little did she know, tonight was only the beginning. The evening at the hall had changed everything, but the real storm came the very next day. The video of her performance had spread far beyond the walls of that room. People who weren't even there started talking about the unknown waitress who played like someone who carried her entire life in every note. And with each hour, more people wanted to know who she was. But all she wanted was quiet. She didn't wake up feeling special or important. She woke up tired. Her mind was full of the same worries she had every morning. She had bills stacked on the shelf, shifts to cover, and no idea what would happen after what she had done in front of that crowd. She didn't crave attention. She didn't want praise. She just wanted a normal day. But life wasn't about to give her one. When she stepped out of her small room and walked to the living area, she noticed her roommate staring at her phone with wide eyes. Her roommate didn't speak right away, just turned the screen toward her. There she was, in the exact moment she had touched the piano. frozen in a thumbnail where her face looked calmer than she actually felt that night. "You're everywhere." Her roommate whispered. She didn't know how to respond. The whole thing felt unreal. She had played because she had been pushed, embarrassed, cornered. She had played because she felt she had no choice left. And yet somehow the song had grown wings she never expected. Her phone buzzed nonstop. Messages filled the screen. Some were kind. Some were surprised. Some were simply asking, "Who are you?" She ignored all of them. Her shift started in 2 hours, and she was already late getting ready. She tied her hair quickly, put on her worn-out shoes, and left the house hoping no one would recognize her in daylight. She had no idea if the people she served food to regularly even watched videos like that. Maybe it would all fade away in a day or two. She walked quickly through the crowded streets, avoiding eye contact with anyone who looked at her for more than a second. Every time someone slowed down or tilted their head, her stomach tightened. At the restaurant, she expected chaos. But when she walked through the kitchen door, no one screamed her name or surrounded her. Instead, she felt dozens of glances brushing over her as she moved through the room. Something had changed. People were quieter than they usually were when she arrived. The head server approached her slowly. "You okay?" she asked. She nodded even though she wasn't sure. The other waiters didn't tease her the way they usually did in the morning. They didn't talk loudly. They didn't laugh like every day. Some tried to smile, but their expressions carried something else: curiosity, maybe disbelief. She didn't blame them. Most of them had never heard her say more than a few words about herself. She clocked in and grabbed her apron, feeling like she was stepping into a place where she didn't fully belong anymore. During lunch rush, people walked in and out without noticing her, and she started to believe she was safe. Maybe the video would slow down. Maybe people wouldn't recognize her at all. But then something happened. A couple walked in, glanced around, and their eyes stopped on her. At first, she thought they were choosing a table. But they weren't. They were staring at her like they knew her. The woman whispered something to the man and nudged him. Then he raised his phone slightly and tilted it toward her, just enough for her to see her own face on the screen. She froze. The woman smiled nervously. "Are you?" She didn't finish the sentence. She shook her head quickly and stepped away, pretending she hadn't heard anything. Her hands felt shaky. Her throat tightened. She wanted to hide in the kitchen and never come out, but hiding was impossible. More people entered. More people stared. A few whispered. One smiled at her warmly, like he just wanted to say he admired what she did. It didn't matter. Every pair of eyes felt heavy on her skin. By the end of her shift, she was exhausted, not from serving food, but from the weight of attention she wasn't used to carrying. She went home with her head low, wishing she could disappear for a week. Maybe more. But far away in a quiet office with tall glass windows. Someone else was watching the viral video. It was him, the same man who had stood in front of her that night. He had seen the comments, the shares, the praise she was receiving. He saw people writing things like, "She plays better than half the performers I've watched on stage." Another said, "Why was she a waitress when she played like that?" Someone else wrote, "She should perform again. She deserves a chance." He had never expected this. She wasn't supposed to overshadow the night. She wasn't supposed to become the center of all the attention. The guests were supposed to remember him, not her. But the more he scrolled, the sharper the truth became. No one was talking about him, only her. His jaw tightened as he replayed the video. He watched the moment she took the seat, the way the room went silent, the way she leaned into the melody, the way people stared at her with disbelief. It bothered him, not because she played badly. She didn't. She played in a way that made him feel something he hadn't felt in years, something he wasn't ready to understand. He turned the screen off and sat back in his chair, staring out the window. The lights from the city were blurry in the night air. He didn't move for a long moment. Then he picked up his phone again and sent a message to someone. Find her. The person on the other end didn't ask why. They just replied, "Yes, sir." The next morning came too quickly. She didn't sleep much, afraid someone would knock on her door or recognize her in the hallway. She dragged herself out of bed and sat at the small table, staring at her cup of tea. The steam faded slowly, like it was tired too. Her roommate walked into the room. "Are you going to work today?" She nodded. What else could she do? But when she reached the restaurant, something felt wrong. Two people in suits stood near the entrance, speaking to the manager. The manager looked confused, but kept nodding. When he noticed her, his expression shifted into something she couldn't understand. He called her over. She thought she had done something wrong. Maybe she was late. Maybe someone complained about her. Her heart thudded painfully in her chest as she approached. "These people want to talk to you," the manager said quietly. She turned to them. The two people were polite, but their serious expressions made her even more nervous. "Don't be scared," the woman said softly. "We were sent by someone who wants to meet you." Her confusion grew. "Meet me? Why?" The man stepped forward a little. "He saw your performance." Her stomach dropped. She didn't need them to say his name. She already knew. She stepped back instinctively. "I don't want to meet him." The woman raised her hands calmly. "We understand." But he insisted. He said it's important. Important for who? She wondered. Certainly not for her. The manager watched silently, torn between wanting to protect her and knowing he couldn't interfere. "We can take you now," the woman said gently. She shook her head again, fear twisting inside her. "I have work." "Your shift can be covered?" the manager murmured. She looked at him with pleading eyes, hoping he would give her an excuse to stay. But he only gave her a slow, apologetic nod. She stood there for a moment, unsure what to do. Finally, she exhaled shakily and said, "Fine, but just for a little while." The two people smiled softly, believed. They led her outside, where a sleek car waited by the curb. She slid into the back seat, her hands trembling just slightly. She didn't know why he wanted to see her. She didn't know what he would say. She didn't know why her heart felt heavy and uncertain. As the car pulled away, the city buildings stretched tall around her. She looked out the window, wondering if she had just walked into something she wasn't ready for. And far across the city, he was waiting impatiently, silently, with a look in his eyes that no one around him dared question. Their worlds were about to collide again, and neither of them knew how much this meeting would change the path ahead. She sat in the back seat of the car, her hands placed tightly on her lap as the city passed by outside the window. The streets she usually walked every day now felt strange from behind the tinted glass, almost like she was entering a world she didn't belong to. She didn't know what he wanted from her. She didn't know why he had sent people to bring her in. All she knew was that nothing felt normal anymore. The ride was quiet. The woman in the passenger seat didn't look back even once, and the man driving focused completely on the road. No one spoke. No one explained anything. And the weight of the silence made her heart beat faster. After what felt like too long, the car slowed down in front of a tall building. Its smooth surface reflected the afternoon light. The entrance had guards, people in suits, and a kind of atmosphere that made her feel even smaller. "This way," the woman said softly as she stepped out. She followed, her steps unsure. The lobby inside was large, almost silent despite the people moving around. Everyone walked with purpose, dressed sharply, their faces focused. She felt out of place immediately. They led her to an elevator that shot upward so quickly she had to steady herself. When the doors opened, They stepped into a hallway lined with glass walls and soft lights. Everything looked expensive, too perfect for someone like her. Then they stopped at a door. "He's waiting inside," the man said. She swallowed hard. For a moment, no one moved. She felt the urge to run, to escape, to hide somewhere far away where the world didn't know her, where no one expected anything from her. But running wasn't an option. The woman opened the door gently. She stepped in. The room was spacious but quiet. With warm lights and tall windows, it showed the city stretching endlessly in the distance. He stood near the window, his back to her, his hands in his pockets. He didn't turn around right away. The door closed softly behind her. Finally, he spoke. "You came." His voice didn't sound angry. It didn't even sound commanding. But it carried a weight that made her straighten her posture. She didn't answer. He turned slowly to face her. His expression was unreadable, not proud, not amused, not upset, just unreadable. For a moment, he studied her quietly, and the silence between them stretched. "Do you know what's happened since that night?" He asked Dot. She shook her head slightly, unsure how much she already knew. "Everyone is talking about you," he said. "People who were there, people who weren't. Your name is everywhere now." She looked down, her voice barely above a whisper. "I didn't ask for that." "I know," he said. "And that's exactly why I needed to see you." Her brows tightened with confusion. He took a step closer, but not too close, just enough to look directly into her eyes. "What you did that night," he said quietly, "was rare." She didn't say anything. She didn't know what to say. "You played like you were carrying something heavy," he continued. "Like the music wasn't just a skill, but a part of you. Most people don't play like that." Still, she remained silent. He took a breath and walked around his desk, but instead of sitting, he leaned against it. "I want to offer you something," he said. Her heart skipped. "No," she said immediately. Without even thinking, he blinked in surprise. "You didn't even hear what it is." "I don't want anything," she said quietly. "I just want to go back to my life." "That life is gone," he said calmly. Her stomach turned. "Why? Because of one video?" "It'll fade. Everything fades." He shook his head. "Not this." "But I didn't want all this attention," she said. "I didn't want people looking at me like I'm someone special. I'm not." His eyes softened just slightly. "You don't decide that anymore?" His words made her chest tighten. She didn't like the sound of it. She didn't like the idea of losing control of her own life. He continued, "I want you to perform again." "No," he raised a brow. "You're refusing again?" "Yes," she said firmly. "I won't perform." "Why?" he asked. She took a slow breath. "Because that night wasn't about performing. It wasn't something I planned. I didn't do it for attention or praise. I did it because I was pushed into it." His jaw tightened slightly, as if he didn't like hearing that. "At least let me explain the offer," he said. She remained quiet. "There's a charity event in a few days," he said. "A real one. Nothing like the gathering you were in. It's a place where music actually means something. People go there to listen, not to show off. I want you to play one piece." She shook her head immediately. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't get angry. He just looked at her like he was trying to understand something she wasn't saying. "Why are you so afraid of playing?" he asked quietly. She looked away. She didn't want to answer. She didn't want to open that door. "Tell me," he said gently. Her voice came out thin. "I used to play. A lot. Every day. But life changed. And now, I don't want to go back to something that reminds me of everything I lost." He didn't interrupt. He didn't push. He just waited. She took a breath. Playing that night brought it all back. the memories, the pressure, the feeling of not being enough. I don't want to feel that again. He nodded slowly, as if he finally understood. So this isn't fear of performing, he said softly. It's fear of feeling. The words hit her harder than she expected. She blinked quickly, trying not to show how close she was to breaking. He stood up straight. I can't force you, he said. Not this time. You came here on your own, and you can leave on your own. She didn't expect that. But before you go, he added, I need you to know something. That night, when you played, the room didn't just go silent because they were shocked. It went silent because what you played made them feel something too. Music like that doesn't come from talent alone. It comes from truth. And not everyone can share truth like that. She felt her throat tighten. So if you ever change your mind, he said, the offer is open. She looked at him quietly. Why do you care so much? He hesitated. It was the first time she saw him look unsure. Because I haven't heard someone play like that in years, he said simply. And the world shouldn't lose a sound like yours. A long silence followed. She lowered her eyes. She didn't know how to respond to anything he said. I want to go home now, she whispered. He nodded. I'll have someone take you. She turned to leave, but he called her name softly. She paused. One more thing, he said. Don't hide from what you're good at just because it scares you. Sometimes the things we fear most are the things that can change our lives the most. She didn't reply. She walked out with her heart heavy and confused. The same two people escorted her back to the car. As she sat inside, she felt like the world around her had shifted again. The drive back felt longer. Her thoughts were loud, tumbling over each other. She didn't want to perform. She didn't want attention. She didn't want her life to change. But deep down, something else whispered quietly. A tiny spark she didn't want to acknowledge. When she finally reached home, she stepped out of the car and hurried inside before anyone could see her. She closed the door behind her and leaned against it, breathing heavily. Her roommate rushed over. Where did you go? What happened? Are you okay? She didn't answer for a few seconds. Then she whispered, I met him. Her roommate's eyes widened. And she dropped onto the couch. He wants me to perform again. Are you going to? She shook her head. No, I can't. Her roommate sat beside her gently. Maybe you're stronger than you think. She closed her eyes. She didn't feel strong. She felt lost. Later that night, while the city quieted outside, she sat alone in her small room. She opened her old bag from years ago. Inside it lay sheets of music, some torn, some fading. And at the very bottom, a small notebook filled with melodies she had once written. She touched the pages gently. Her chest tightened. A part of her longed to play again. Not for him. Not for the world dot, but for herself. She placed the notebook on her lap, staring at it as if it held answers she wasn't ready to face. Somewhere across the city, he stood by the window of his office again. The city lights flickered below as he wondered if she would ever say yes. He had no idea that she was sitting in a small room, struggling with the same question. Their paths were still intertwined, and soon, something would happen that neither of them expected, something that would force her to make a choice she had spent years avoiding. The next morning arrived quietly, almost too quietly for her restless mind. She hadn't slept much. Her eyes felt heavy, her thoughts tangled, and her chest still carried the same weight she'd been feeling for days. The video was still spreading. People still talked about her, and his offer lingered in her mind like a question she couldn't push away. She tried to start her day normally, but nothing felt normal anymore. Her phone buzzed endlessly with messages she didn't answer. Her roommate hovered around her gently, unsure how to help, but unwilling to leave her alone. She left for work hoping that maybe. Somehow, things had calmed down. They hadn't died as she reached the restaurant. A small group stood outside, not reporters, not crowds. Just a handful of strangers holding their phones. When they saw her, they looked uncertain, like they weren't sure if they should approach her or give her space. A few whispered her name. One smiled softly, not asking for anything, just acknowledging her. She squeezed past them quickly, her heart racing. Once inside, her manager looked at her with gentle concern. "Are you sure you want to keep working?" He asked. "I have to," she whispered. But the truth was, she didn't know what she wanted anymore. Her shift passed slowly. Every time the door opened, she braced herself, afraid someone would walk in asking for her, or worse, pointing a camera at her. By the time her shift ended, she felt drained. She just wanted to go home. But as she stepped outside, someone called her name. She froze. A young boy stood there, maybe 11 or 12, holding a small notebook. He approached her shyly. Sorry," he said, almost whispering. "I saw the video. You play really nice." She blinked in surprise. "Thank you." He hesitated, gripping the notebook. I'm learning piano too. My mom works a lot, so I usually practice alone. When I saw your video, it made me feel like maybe I can play better someday." Her heart softened. She crouched slightly so she wasn't towering over him. "You will. If you keep practicing, you'll get there." He nodded, his face lighting up with a shy smile. "I hope so." Then he offered the notebook. "Can you sign it?" She stared at him. She'd never signed anything for anyone before. Never imagined she ever would. But the hope in his eyes was real. She opened the notebook, signed her name carefully, and handed it back. He looked at it like it meant something important. "Thank you," he said softly. She nodded. "Keep playing." As he ran off, she stood there, stunned. She hadn't realized her music could reach someone that deeply, especially someone who didn't know her story at all. That maybe that boy was the reason music existed at all, because sometimes it reached someone who needed it. She walked home slowly, her thoughts quieter this time. Something inside her felt different. It wasn't certainty, not yet, but it was something close to courage. That evening, her roommate cooked dinner and talked softly about random things to distract her. But her mind wasn't on the food or the conversation. It was on the notebook she kept in her room. Later that night, she sat on her bed and opened it again. The pages were filled with melodies she had written years ago. Music she had tucked away because life had forced her to choose survival over dreams. She ran her fingers over the notes, remembering how it used to feel when music wasn't fear. It was home. She didn't know how long she sat like that, lost in thought. Then there was a soft knock on the door. Her roommate peeked in. "Someone's here to see you." Her heart dropped. "Who?" I think you should come out." She hesitated, then followed. Standing in the living room was him. He wasn't surrounded by guards or assistants. He wasn't wearing the same cold confidence he had the first time they met. He looked almost human this time, tired, concerned, quiet. "I know I shouldn't come here," he said softly. "And I'm sorry if this surprises you. But I needed to talk to you." She didn't move. "Why?" "Because you didn't answer my messages," he said. "I didn't want to." He nodded, accepting it. "I understand." A silence stretched between them. Finally, he took a step forward, not close enough to invade her space, just close enough to be heard clearly. "I didn't come to pressure you," he said. "I didn't come to force anything. I came because I want to apologize." She stared at him, genuinely shocked. "For what?" "For that night," he said. "For embarrassing you. For making you feel small. I shouldn't have done that. And I shouldn't have assumed you owed anyone a performance." She didn't know what to say. He continued. "When I watched the video again, When I saw how people reacted, I realized something. You didn't silence that room because you wanted to prove me wrong. You silenced it because the music mattered to you. And I ruined that moment for you by forcing it. Her chest tightened. She had never expected him to admit that. He looked away for a moment, as if trying to find the right words. Music isn't about power, he said quietly. But that night, I treated it like it was. I treated you like you were just entertainment. That wasn't fair. She swallowed hard. He looked at her again, his voice softer this time. I came here to tell you something simple. You don't owe me anything, or anyone. If you never want to perform again, that's your choice. But if you do, you can choose the stage, the moment, the music. No pressure. No crowd expecting something from you. Just you doing what you love. A long silence followed. Her roommate quietly left the room to give them space. She finally found her voice. Why do you care so much? He sighed. Because I've been surrounded by performers for years. People who play for applause, for fame, for attention. But you played for something real. And I haven't seen that in a long time. Another silence, but this one felt different. He stepped back slightly. I'll leave now. I just wanted to say what I needed to say. He turned toward the door, but something in her heart tugged. Wait. He stopped. She hesitated. The event you mentioned. The charity one. When is it? He turned slowly, hope flickering in his eyes. 3 days. She took a soft breath. If I play, can I choose the song? His eyes softened completely. Of course. And no crowd close to the stage? I'll arrange it. And no cameras pointing at my face? He nodded. Anything you want. She looked down at her hands. For the first time, she didn't feel afraid, just uncertain, but in a way that felt like growth. I'll think about it, she whispered. He smiled gently. That's all I hoped for. He left quietly, without expecting anything more from her. When the door closed, she sank onto the couch, overwhelmed. Her roommate rushed in. What happened? She shook her head softly. I don't know yet, but maybe I'll play again. Her roommate smiled, proud of her. I think you should. Not for him. For you. That night, she sat with her notebook open and her old keyboard plugged in. She touched the keys gently. They felt familiar, like an old friend she had avoided for too long. She began to play. The melody started unsure, shaky, soft. But slowly, it grew warmer, stronger. Her fingers remembered the way even her heart had forgotten. By the time she finished, she realized something playing didn't hurt. It healed. 3 days later, she stood backstage at the charity event. The hall wasn't crowded. The lights weren't overwhelming. Everything was quieter, calmer, built to make musicians feel safe. He waited near the side, respectful, not interfering. When she stepped toward the piano, her breath trembled, but her steps were steady. She sat down. The room hushed. She closed her eyes and began to play the melody she had written years ago, the one she'd once loved. Been abandoned, been rediscovered. Each note felt like a piece of her story, released gently into the world. And slowly, the hall fell into the same kind of silence the other room had. Soft, full, deeply moved. When she finished, she didn't look up. She didn't need applause. She didn't want praise. She just breathed. The hall remained quiet for a few seconds, then rose in warm, gentle applause. Not loud, not overwhelming, not demanding. Just grateful. She stood slowly, her heart calm. For the first time in years, she felt like the music belonged to her again. Backstage, he looked at her with quiet respect. No pride, no ego, just gratitude. You did beautifully, he said softly. She nodded. Thank you for letting me choose. He smiled. It was your stage, your moment. I was just glad to hear you play again. She didn't know what the future would hold, whether she would perform more, whether she would return to her old life, or whether something new was waiting. But she knew one thing for sure. The music was hers again. And this time, she wasn't afraid of it.